Philosophy of change. What is your philosophy of change? The reason I ask is that it often determines what you believe about organizational change and the things you might consider when approaching organizational change. That is the focus of this video. So, what do you then believe about organizational change? What are your experiences? How have those experiences driven your beliefs? How does that influence your attitudes and approaches to change? These are critical questions as you understand why you believe what you believe about organizational change. What roles have you played in organizational change? First, there's the change strategist. This is the person who sets the change in motion, may legitimize the action. The change implementer. This is part of the change team, responsible for getting it done. And lastly, the change recipient. This is the person or people most impacted by the organizational change. You may have multiple roles, but chances are in any organizational change, you'll be in one of these three major roles. Back to the question, what is your change philosophy? What do you believe about people? This is a critical first question. Because organizational change involves not the organization in totality changing, but each individual individually making a decision to change, and collectively the change takes place. So what do you believe about people and how they relate to their job, their motivations? Secondly, what do you believe about how people work together? This is a critical question as to your particular organization. Are they a group of individuals working in competition, or are they more of a team working together? This type of organization dynamic makes a big difference in how you can approach organizational change. Thirdly, everyone has a set of basic beliefs. These are the beliefs that really form the assumptions that you bring to any decision, the assumptions you bring when you decide and in what way you approach organizational change. Let's talk about the change philosophy in use here. First, I believe that organizational change is becoming a core competency. Secondly, this is critical that people, in my belief, do not resist change. They resist being change. As a rule, people do not like boredom. They like the routine, yes, but they do not like to be bored. They like to be able to have an opportunity to change things up when they decide to do so. Therefore, the key then is enabling people to be involved in the change process so that they become part of the process, not an action that the process is taking upon. So again, they don't like being changed. Third, change doesn't have to require uncertainty. Oftentimes, change is a surprise. The people who are recipients of the change do not see it coming because they've been left out of the earlier conversations as to what the problems were. This is a critical component here of how to involve people so that they don't face change as an uncertainty. This does not necessarily mean that they know with full confidence exactly what's going to happen, but they have a context to understand the decisions being made and the processes being put in place for change. Going back to the essentials of organizational change, both management components and leadership aspects are required in that it's not change management nor change leadership, but a combination of both being required. Further, no single approach works in all situations. Every organization is different. Every change initiative is different. Best practices can be generalized, but they may not fit each specific. This is where you get into the need of understanding the theory of why certain practices work the way they do. Once you understand why practices work, then you understand enough to be able to modify the practice for each circumstance. The question then comes, where should the organization focus when we talk about organizational change. And this is where you get into some of the philosophy of change, in that you can approach change as a continuous, incremental change process, in that there's always some change, but there's small changes taking place. Alternatively, should change be a very large change that happens irregularly, in that you approach a massive transformative change and then you have a resting period. And there is some argument that organizations do need to rest because change is rather chaotic. If you handle small continuous changes, they're less disruptive and they do move you forward, but will they move you sufficiently far without having to do a periodic large-scale transformative change? This is a key question in that many organizations do not answer, and by failing to answer this question, they basically postpone taking any change. This is a philosophical question that all organizations must deal with. Further, how is change to be treated? Oftentimes, managers approach the human resource department wanting employee development. They want their employees to be changed in a training process. Alternatively, you can approach the change as a special project. Again, this is more of how you deal with change. Do you deal with it as fixing the person, or do you deal with it organization-wide? This, again, is a philosophical approach that you bring to your management of how you want to run your company. The question then becomes, what are the fundamental approaches or the mindset that you may take in approaching organizational change? We addressed this briefly when we talked about change management, or the ability to control aspects of change, versus change leadership, or where you have to influence because you cannot control. The change management, though, can be applied to some things that are controllable, such as structure, processes, policy, and the measurement of performance indicators. This does not necessarily mean that they will be adopted by people, but you can create them and put them in place for employee adoption. Alternatively, certain things have to be led. The change vision, how people are influenced in their behavior, their attitudes, and to what extent do they move from compliance into commitment. So certain things can be controlled, other things have to be influenced. The critical component is knowing which is which. There's also a third component here of understanding what is constrained or fixed. Some things, such as government regulations, are fixed and outside of your control. Other things may be ethical in that you want them to be fixed, in that they become a core principle that you value as an organization. Who is involved then? This is another interesting philosophical question as to, is it top-down versus truly everybody in the organization being involved? This becomes a question of, how do you want to manage your organization? To what extent do you believe in change enablement involving people? There's also a paradox here. The paradox is that nothing happens without topside approval. Yes, in many cases, because if it is a large decision, you're going to need a topside approval. But at the same time, at the bottom of the organization, nothing happens without people agreeing to take action. There's also a third group. These are the process experts. Consultants, though, bring expertise. They may bring the time to do the analysis, but you cannot overly rely upon them to do the decisions and take the actions, because once they leave, they will take that knowledge base with them unless it is properly transferred to the organization itself. Further, what are the alternative sources of expertise? This is where this series of videos hopes to find a home, in that there's many sources of expertise that can be learned outside of hiring a consultant per se. What do you change first? And this is another philosophical approach to organizational change. Do you change the structure? This is oftentimes a knee-jerk reaction to change itself. Because they don't know what to change, they change what can easily be changed, such as the organization chart. This is a direct quote. "I don't believe you change hearts. I believe you change laws, you change allocation of resources, you change the way systems operate." This is an exact quote from a politician that I'm sure you know. At the same time, it also clearly states a philosophical approach as to structure first. It is explicitly ignoring the changing of attitudes or people's hearts. You focus on structures such as forcing compliance through the laws, how you allocate the resources, or how you allocate or decide the way the systems operate. All of these are structural approaches to organizational change. This then brings up the broader issue: are you seeking compliance or are you seeking commitment? Obviously, you want to find a way to get commitment, but this raises other broader questions as to what do you change first, which is where we started a few minutes ago. Do you change the structure, the organization, and the processes because these are easier to control? You can also say, though, that structure has some memory to it, and that once you build something in the structure, it has some tendency to remain because it is formalized. This is the formalization approach versus the more informal or cultural approach to change. You can also approach change by focusing on people's attitudes. What do they believe? What assumptions do they hold? This gets down to a matter of commitment versus compliance. If they believe or their assumptions are aligned with those involved with the change initiative, you're more likely to move them toward commitment. A third basic approach is behavior. You focus on what people actually do. You don't care about the structure, you don't care about their attitude, as long as they do what you want them to do. This is the ultimate goal. Once you get them behaving the way you desire, habits can be established, and therefore that will continue the process. So therefore, do you approach change first from the structure, an attitude, or behavioral approach? These are, again, philosophical questions as to what do you believe about people and how they relate to the change that is needed. There's different models of change then, the cause-effect drivers for change. Let's talk about these. First is the structural approach. This indicates that the structure established drives behavior. Repeated behavior will drive habit, and with habit comes change. The structure here might be the organizational roles, the processes, the responsibilities. The responsibilities include not only the work responsibilities, but the decision rights as to what decisions are made by who in the organization. Alternatively, the attitude approach focuses just on changing the attitude. In this case, the behavior is what's driving the change because of what the person believes. The third approach comes more from a visionary approach. With vision, you then work toward aligning the organization between the actual work processes and the vision. Then you work toward commitment, and with vision, alignment, commitment comes change, leadership of change. We then conclude with the question we started with. What is your change philosophy? The next video will actually work through a worksheet that will help you identify your philosophy of change. Within this, two main questions will be asked. What do you believe about organizational change, and how does that influence your attitude and approach to change? What is your philosophy of change?